So I thought what I would do is just explain a little bit about who we are, because in some ways who we are is what helps to give this scheme, the new scheme, the accreditation scheme that I'll be talking about today, its authority. What we're being asked to do by Parliament, by the government under the Health and Social Care Act. And then a little bit about our thoughts on the design of the accreditation scheme so far. And Jeff and Monica have been very closely involved with me in helping to develop it. We're currently called the Council for Healthcare Regulatory Excellence. Later this year our name will change and will become the Professional Standards Authority for Health and Social Care. What we are is actually an independent UK-wide organisation that was set up in 2003, following on from some major failings in care. I don't know if any of you ever were aware of what's called the Bristol Inquiry, which was a major inquiry into the death of babies undergoing heart surgery. One of the recommendations that came out of that inquiry was that there should be an oversight body set up to oversee health profession regulation. And that's because there are 9 health profession regulators, statutory regulators currently, such as the General Medical Council, for example, who oversee the regulation of people like doctors and nurses and osteopaths and physiotherapists and a whole range of different professions. We're there to protect the health, safety and well-being of patients and the public. That's our primary role. And the easiest way to think about us is that we're there as part of a check and balance. So what we're here to do is to make sure that care is always tilted towards the benefit of the patient and the public. In anything, there are always conflicts of interests, and what people found in the past was that self-regulation could be prone to being biased towards the needs of the professionals rather than towards the needs of the patients and the public. So what we're there to do is to oversee it, to make sure that that balance is kept tilted in the right way. And the other role we have is to advise government, and that's, of course, not only the government in England, but also in Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales, on matters related to regulation. So every year we get commissioned by the Department of Health on behalf of the 4 governments to give them advice on particular matters. Just to give you a slight example of that, a little while ago we were asked to advise on the issue of what they call extended practice. In healthcare, certainly there is a lot now that's done by nurses, for example, that in the past used to be done by doctors, or that is done by healthcare assistants, for example, that used to be done by nurses. And what we were asked to do was to consider whether the existing regulation was enough, or whether anything more needed to be done to cover the situation in which a nurse started to take on additional roles, or perhaps started to practice complementary therapy, so doing something outside of the normal professional practice. And our advice to the government on that matter was that no, actually what was there was sufficient because of the requirement that people should practice within the sphere of their competence, and that should be enough. So we do produce advice periodically, and we publish that on our website. The other role we have is promoting learning and improvement. So in everything we do, we report on the performance of the regulators annually to Parliament, saying whether or not they're doing a good job in terms of protecting the public, and both individually, as individual organisations, and also collectively. So in other words, is this model of regulation working well? That's what we also provide advice on. And over the last few years, we've kind of come to formulate a principle of regulation that we call right touch. And I'll mention it to you briefly because it underpins the work now that we do, and it also underpins the government's approach to regulation. Essentially, whenever there is a problem that relates to the safety of people, safety of patients, in your case children, or in the case of social care of members of the public, what we say is don't jump to regulation first, because there are a number of existing mechanisms that can be brought into play to control something. So don't assume regulation is the answer. And over the last few years, you've probably recognised yourselves that there's been a tendency, really, it's quite easy for government to say, well, we'll just pass a law, well, we'll just pass a new regulation and that will solve the problem. And what we've come to understand is, actually, it doesn't always, and you need a better understanding of what really creates a situation in which things can go wrong. And we've identified these particular elements here, and you'll recognise yourselves as part of that. So in any particular issue, we say, what's the problem? What's the extent of the risk? The best solutions are always as close to the problem as possible, because the regulator is never in the room. And we recommend a series of action in relation to that. So when we look, for example, at the issue of healthcare support workers, we were asked, should they be regulated? Well, we applied these principles and said, well, actually, do you need law, do you need regulation? Healthcare assistants are working for employers. There are special controls that employers should have in place, recruitment practices, induction training, and so on. They work under delegated authority of professionals, so you've got an additional protection there for patients and the public too. You've got the role that people themselves can play in terms of raising concerns if they've got issues. So what we went from was people telling to us, well, it's a huge problem like this, to us saying, well, actually, it's like that. That's the extent of risk that we're trying to correct and look at. So, over the last few years, there have been a call to the government to regulate a number of different professional groups. Counsellors and psychotherapists, for example, are you aware that they're not currently regulated? Yeah. Okay, so that's a group. There are also people called clinical physiologists, clinical perfusionists who work alongside anaesthetists and heart surgeons, for example, carrying out some quite invasive techniques. Those people aren't regulated currently. Complementary therapists, of course, aren't regulated. Acupuncturists, homeopaths, sports therapists, a whole range of people who aren't. And there have been calls for these groups to be regulated. And what the government did was say, or what Parliament did was say, ultimately, do we really think that we need to extend regulation to increasing numbers of professional and occupational groups? And what they decided instead was that they wanted to try a new approach, which draws on the learning that we've all got from regulation in the past and what works and what doesn't. And we've given us an opportunity to design something new and something different. So they've asked Professional Standards Authority, our organisation, to do that. So when we were first asked whether or not we thought it was possible, we had conversations with a number of professional bodies, such as PTUK, to think about how it might work and what the effect would be. As you can see, Parliament have decided that they want to go ahead with what they call a system of assured voluntary registration as being a more proportionate way of improving the protection to the public. The Health and Social Care Act. The slight delay that Monica referred to earlier has of course been tied up with a slight delay of the Health and Social Care Act, which has probably been one of the most hotly contested pieces of legislation for a long time. What it has done is to extend the role of our organisation in a number of ways, but the one that's of interest to you is the one that asks us to set standards and criteria for accreditation for voluntary registers. And then, as you can see, to do all of this. So what they're asking us to do, first of all, is to design and set the criteria and to publish them. These are for organisations. What we're going to do with the accreditation scheme is assure Parliament and assure the public that organisations who set standards for professionals, who authorise the training or approve the training courses that they're having, who manage the registers, and who ultimately deal with complaints about registrants' conduct and competence, are themselves trustworthy and fit bodies. So what we will be doing in the future is essentially approving registers such as that held by PTUK and giving assurance to Parliament and assurance to members of the public, to employers, to commissioners, that this is a good organisation and therefore you can take people from its register, employ or use people from its register with confidence. So that's the way the system works. We will essentially set the criteria, organisations will apply to us, and we will assess whether or not we think they meet the standards that we have set. If they do, we will grant accreditation to them. We will approve them, essentially. And then we'll keep that under review. It's not going to be a once-off, and that's it. We're obviously going to listen, as Monica said, to feedback from people who use the services and from the registrants on it and from other sources as to whether or not it's working effectively or not. And I've just seen a spelling mistake. I expect you to see it too. Okay, so we're going to do all of that. There are a number of things that we have to do, as with any new initiative and any new policy initiative, in terms of assessing what effect it might have, but I will come on to that. And then there's the bit that we like as well, which is about promoting learning and improving. So just as with statutory regulation, we will be looking to encourage organisations to adopt best practice. One of the very interesting things about designing this scheme is there are now close to 60 organisations that have contacted me proactively and said, actually, we're really interested in this scheme. We think we want to be accredited by you. And I had a series of what I call my early adopters, Light Play Therapy UK, who contacted us when the white paper first came out and said, actually, we're interested in this. And I held a series of workshops with them to think through what some of the issues were. We've now published our standards for consultation. They're out for consultation until the 10th of July. And they are literally the product of co-creation. We have created these standards together. And I'll explain to you why that's important in a moment. And it's this. 60 organisations. I haven't counted how many different professions and occupations that covers, but it is a vast range. So here are some of them here. They all do very different things, and of course the risks that they pose to members of the public are all very different. And the way that they all are is very different. There are organisations that have got 36,000 registrants on them, and there are organisations that have got 200. The amount of fees that they charge, therefore their income varies depending obviously on how many people they've got and the amount of activity that they do. So they've got variable income. Some of them operate just with volunteers, some of them are affluent enough to be able to afford to pay people. They have different levels of qualifications, sometimes different beliefs about the type of treatment that they should offer. So we have to design the scheme so that it covers this whole range of different disciplines. You could imagine that if we were to set some particular standards for counselling and therapy, for example, or for healthcare scientists, you might be concerned that they weren't going to be suitable for an organisation that oversees, that registers play therapists. So you need to understand all of your work, the situations in which you are working currently, to make sure that what we design doesn't impact negatively, but actually is positive and helps you all. Remote healthcare, I tell you, I've come across so many disciplines and things I never knew existed before. It's been quite fascinating doing all of this. And one organisation was this remote healthcare. I didn't know that there are people who specialise in doing things like going out to oil rigs and remote mountain places and places you can't get into in order to provide first-line care. That's really interesting to me. So, our approach to designing it. Of course, the right touch principles, the right touch regulation principles, which are identify the problem before the solution, make sure you're clear about the extent of the risk, get as close to the problem as you can, the source of the problem as you can, keep it simple, and watch out for unintended consequences. So those are the principles that we use. And what we're doing with this scheme, we're saying, is enhancing consumer protection. If you imagine at the moment, if you want to find a complementary therapist, for example, you might ask a friend, drop onto a website, have a look at the searches, or you decide you want to find a counsellor or psychotherapist. There are 400, some of them tell me, different modalities or types of therapies around, lots of different qualifications. How does an ordinary member of the public like me make sense of it, and how do I decide whether I want to go and see somebody who's got a master's or I want to go and see somebody who's got a certificate? Does it matter? I have no idea. No idea. And a lot of the organisations have got symbols and things that tell me that it means something, some kind of quality mark or some kind of accreditation. I don't know what that means. I don't know whether the body that's done that is trustworthy and authoritative or not. So that's the current situation. What we're going to intend to do is to make the VIA a single place. So in future, if somebody wants to employ a play therapist, for example, they will be able to come onto our website. There'll be a section for voluntary registers. They'll be able to click on that. We will give them some explanations and information, links through to the register of the organisations that we've accredited. They'll be able to come through to Play Therapy UK, click on it, knowing that you are all on a register that's been accredited by us. So what we will be doing is saying we are an independent UK body, we are a credible, authoritative organisation. If you want to find therapists, if you want to find professionals then, that you can feel confident about, then come through our route. So that's essentially what we're trying to do here. And we've also thought carefully about what our offer is, and we're saying, well, okay, so in the marketplace, how will you be able to tell if someone's good or not? You'll look out for our accreditation mark, which we're having designed. What we will do is to say, give good information to patients and the public so that they can make an informed choice. We'll do that ourselves. It will be one of our standards for the organisations that we're accrediting. And we're looking, as you all are looking, to raise standards of practice and behaviour so that overall the experience of the public is getting better. We've got to think about the effect of the market, especially in a time of recession. And that's actually one of the big things that people talk to me a lot is about affordability, both for the organisation that's going to seek accreditation, because we haven't yet worked out how much it will cost for the assessment process. It partly depends how many organisations are going for it. But also on all of you. We need to be clear about what the effect is going to be on the marketplace and the design of this, and we're trying to think that through. This scheme will be not-for-profit. It does have to pay for itself, which means we do have to charge for accreditation to the organisations applying to us, but it will be done on a not-for-profit basis. Is anybody left with sort of, I really don't know what's going on, fog feeling at the moment? Do you want me to clarify your part? No? Okay. When we started talking to people and talking to members of the public, we're trying to understand, so what's the extra offer that we could make this accreditation scheme do currently? And clearly, any member of the public wants the person who's treating them to be competent in what they do. And they also want them to treat them nicely. So behaviour is clearly important, as one would expect. They don't like, when they want to make a complaint, it being difficult and unpleasant and complicated. They don't like having to put a complaint in a backpack and truck one part of it over to one organisation and one part over to another. So that's something else we've looked at, is can we design a standard that will make the complaints experience better for members of the public. And the other thing that people have raised with us, but bearing in mind, of course, we're dealing with people who are working both within the NHS, within perhaps local authorities, but also directly commercially selling services. We've also looked at business practices, because some of the areas that we're looking at, good standards in relation to advertising are important, and financial probity is important. So we are including that area as well. And as I said, making it easier for people. We got asked a number of questions at the beginning. In fact, I think probably one of the first questions I got asked was what people was, and so will you accredit more than one organisation for the same discipline? So would I accredit more than one organisation for counselling and psychotherapy, for example? And after giving that some thought, we came back and said, well, yes, we will. We'll accredit any organisation that meets our standards. And that's for two reasons. Firstly, not good for markets to have a monopoly. Secondly, because the public obviously like the choice that they've got, because they're using people from different organisations and different disciplines now. So we don't want to cut down the choice for the public. And also because the aim of this scheme, the purpose of this, is actually to drive up standards. So actually what we want is for organisations to become accredited, because that means they'll be operating well, they'll be supporting all of you effectively, and overall everyone's experience should improve, yours as well as the children that you are working with. So that's the basis on which we're working. We've talked a lot about what we're very clear about is that what we're trying to do here is something that is different. It's not statutory regulation light or statutory regulation like. It's an opportunity to do it differently and for it to feel different. Now, one of the things that the public don't like, actually, or find really hard, is having to go through the fitness to practice process. That phrase is familiar with you? So in other words, if someone makes a complaint about you and the organisation, in this case PTUK, that holds your register will consider that complaint. But the statutory regulators, that's all done in open hearings, very court-like feeling to it. And of course the person who's made the complaint is the witness to the proceeding, not the complainant. And that can feel quite difficult and impersonal for them going through it. So again, we've looked at that and thought, well, so how can we make it better for the public? And we've suggesting that there should be greater use of mediation in order to bring about a resolution to a difficulty between a member of the public and the practitioner in the most effective and constructive way possible. So we're putting an emphasis on mediation. We are also supporting diversity for the organisations. There are more than one play therapy organisations. There will be differences between you, as there are differences between counselling and psychotherapy, or between the organisations that hold registers for complementary therapists. And we thought carefully about, so do we need to dictate the standard to everybody? Do we need to set one single standard? And everyone does what the Professional Standards Authority said. We listened to what everybody had to say, and we came to the conclusion that actually we don't need to do that at all, and that it's not beneficial for either for the public or particularly inspiring and motivational for practitioners. That actually you're the experts in your area, you know what standards you need to be working to. You can agree those as a consensus. It's one of the hallmarks of a profession, is that it has its own internal sense of belief and in ethics and in setting good standards for itself. And so you are the best people to work out what the standard of professional practice should be. So we are flexible with that, and I think that's probably one of the reasons why the organisations we're working with quite like it, because they're able to have a say and to influence it so that it's good for all of you. Some of this is a bit dry for you, really, but I hope it's okay. What else did I want to say to you? We also thought about, did we need to separate out the governance of the organisation? In regulation, we say that a professional body can't do regulation. We regard it as a conflict in that area. But for this scheme, we're looking at it differently. And we're looking at saying, actually, it's fine as long as you've got clear division between your professional body function and the register holding function. It's fine because you get cross-fertilisation quickly, which helps to lift standards up. So we're happy with what we'll be looking for, obviously, is that the organisations continue to put the interest of the public, the protection of the public first. It is important to understand that this is a voluntary scheme. It's voluntary for PTUK to decide to apply to us for accreditation. It's voluntary for you to decide to go on their register. It's voluntary for employers and commissioners to choose to use you to give services to children. It's all voluntary. And if you do something wrong, PTUK decides that you're not going to be on this register in the future, that doesn't automatically mean that you can't continue working. And that's the big difference between this model, the assured voluntary registration model, and the statutory regulation model. If you get kicked off the register with the statutory regulator, you cannot work. It's a criminal offence to work. Can't do it. Can't practice as a doctor if you're not on GMC's register. So that's the difference. So what we're seeking to do here is to achieve a similar effect, but through choice. So what we're seeking to do here is to get organisations to want to be accredited, you to want to be on an accredited register, the public to want to use you because you're on an accredited register. That's the way this is going to work. There are some risks, there are some unintended consequences. You'd expect us to look out for those, and we continue to do that. And it's one of the reasons why we're very keen for people to participate in our consultation, because we won't think of everything. We need you to think of it for us and let us know, and we share that knowledge and then can design something effectively, hopefully. There is a risk of confusion for the public. Will they really understand the difference between statutory regulation and assured voluntary registration? I doubt it. But will it matter if the quality and the protection is still effective? It doesn't matter. I mean, actually, do you check if your dentist is on the GDC's register, General Dental Council register? I realise I don't. There's a dentist who's got a dentist sign on the door, and I walk in and go, can I be a patient, please? That's it. And I work in it. And I don't check. Affordability I've talked about. This is an issue for us as an organisation. The other risk is that people will say, let's say we accredit organisations for homeopathy. You probably know there's been lots of controversy around is homeopathy effective or not effective as a treatment. There is a risk that in accrediting in an organisation, it will be seen that we're saying the therapy is okay, the therapy is effective, it works. We're not. We're not going to be saying that because we're not in a position to be able to say that. All we're saying is the organisation on the register is a good organisation setting good standards, doing its job properly in terms of help you or reach the standards that you should. That's what we're saying. It might be seen as saying that. Interesting, I saw your research earlier showing the effectiveness actually of play therapy. There's the usual risk that the public can still think that it's professionally dominated, so we've had to think carefully about what do you do about making sure you've got good lay representation in what you do. And it might be insufficient to mitigate the potential for harm. Now, this was a big debate that went on in the House of Lords around not regulating healthcare assistance, and a big concern that the risks are huge. And what we've said is, well, as part of our process, we will ask organisations to assess the risk, to demonstrate to us that they understand the risks that all of you and your practice, and the therapy that you offer potentially poses to the public, and that they've thought about how those risks can be mitigated through the standards they set for you, through the training that they provide for you, so that they can be able to demonstrate to us that they understand it and there's good action being taken to control it, and we'll monitor it. And if after a couple of years it's quite clear that assured voluntary registration is not enough for any risk, then of course we'll be saying that to Parliament. There's going to be a two-part assessment, but that's important because one of our early modelings set the accreditation fee at about £11,000. I don't want you to take that figure and run with it because we haven't worked out what the fee is going to be, but that's where we looked at first of all. And we said, well, you know, if it's a lot of money for an organisation, we don't want them to go too far down the assessment process before discovering that they're not likely to pass, because otherwise they've just wasted £11,000 when we rejected them. That's not in their interests. So we're going to do a two-part thing in which we take a quick look with some deal breakers, as I call them, so sort of early things around, can you show us that you meet that? If you can, then it's worth proceeding, but not, so that you don't waste too much money up front if you're not ready for it. We will award an accreditation certificate and we will copyright the use of our accreditation mark. We've got a marketing company at the moment, a communications company at the moment, working with us on that, and they'll be advising us on how we should handle that. But the idea is that certainly PTUK will be able to use an accreditation symbol, and possibly all of you would be able to use it, or at least make reference to it as well, the information that you have. So we build that sort of brand awareness around, look out for someone with that symbol, that means it's trustworthy. And the standards that we're setting for the organisation are in these areas. So governance, what they're doing in terms of setting standards for all of you, education and training is being provided for you, the way that it's managing its register, how it's responding and how it's asking you to respond to complaints and concerns, the information that you provide to people, the information that it provides to people, and for those organisations where it's relevant, for the professions where it's relevant, premises, products and equipment. don't know whether it's relevant to you, actually. It probably is. I mean, clearly it is for the cosmetic industry, for example. So one of the organisations that's interested in coming with us regulates people who provide Botox and injectable fillers and things. And, you know, there are hygiene issues there, so think about it in terms of that. You probably remember the PICS, the breast implant issue as well. And cosmetic surgeons are also interested in the accreditation scheme for those kind of reasons. So we have that one in there as well. Our timetable is, we're in our consultation period now, that closes the 10th of July. Once I get everyone's comments back on that and I've analysed them, we will then finalise our standards. And we will also be working up the process, our assessment process at that point. Some organisations, and PTUK is included in this, are going to pilot the assessment method that we're using for us over the summer and early autumn. And the scheme is due to start in November 2012, so it's going to start this year, which is quite a short time from the white paper, well, almost 2 years ago, to the actual launch date. Much faster than a lot of organisations have been waiting for statutory regulation anyway. So that's where we are with this, and I'm very willing to take any questions that you might have.
Well, really the most important thing about it, certainly from the therapist point of view, but also from the children and from parents and from people who are thinking about purchasing services for play therapists, is that it's independent assurance. It's not just the profession itself saying we're good, you can trust what we do. It's not even the organisation that holds the register saying it. It's a UK-wide independent body that reports direct to Parliament saying it, and that should give everybody a lot more confidence.